Welcome to Second Nature Podcasts. My name is Mike Brown, and this is my story. 6 years ago, I made a decision that I could no longer live with my addicted self. I had to make a change. It wasn't easy, and it did not go right the first time. When I arrived at the decision to finally commit myself to change, I was free. During this time, I made a promise to myself. This promise was that for 5 years, I was going to focus on me, get my shit together, mentally and physically, so I could build and accomplish the things that I wanted in life, in real life, with the real me, far from the person who I had become in addiction. When I reached that 5-year mark, I wanted to do something to give back, but at the time, I didn't know how or what that would look like. As different ideas evolved, this is what kept coming to mind. Telling my story for those who may be struggling themselves, or for those who may have a loved one, a friend, or relative that are in their own darkness. Knowing that there are others out there who are caught up in the many levels of addiction, and how sometimes all we need is that one little spark to light the tinder and create the flame, to help change the already evolving perspective and stigmatization behind addiction. I waited 5 years to be sure that I had a solid base of sobriety to stand on. I also had some personal goals that I needed to achieve beforehand. I have come to a place where I am ready and comfortable letting people in so they can hear what I went through and how I came out the other side. So what can you expect? You can expect my honest truth. I'm going to use a mix of stories and reflections. I will begin with my many attempts to quit, followed by what led me to that point, digging deeper into my past. From there, I will speak on what my personal opinion of self became and the impact it had on those around me. I'm going to focus heavily on being in treatment, how I grew, and what it involved. Then to finish, I will talk about my early days of recovery, leading into where I am now. I have thought long and hard on this. I have tested my memory to the best of my ability. I've incorporated what I believe to be the important details. This is my opinion and perspective. This is my story. We all have one. I can't control how this is received, and you can take from it what you will. But I want to thank you for listening. And all I ask of you while listening is that you keep an open mind. My addiction, a personality of its own, the voice inside my head needing to be fed. It sat on my shoulder and guided me through it all. I fought, I wrestled. It was in constant control. It led me to and took over while intoxicated, consuming my thoughts when I was not. Always lurking, ready to ruin reason. It was a personality of its own. Although still hungry, it is next to dead. This is episode 1, My Last Night. It was March 24th, 2017. Chris Stapleton was playing a show in the city I grew up in, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. My friend and I had tickets, and we had been patiently waiting for this night to come. What my friend didn't know was that for about a month prior to this, I had been trying to get my drinking and substance abuse under control. My excessive alcohol abuse and cocaine use was taking its toll both mentally and physically. I was beginning to see myself revisiting a path that had led me to some of my worst days, 2 years earlier, back in 2015. I will speak more on that time frame later, but in short, during this period, I had experienced severe anxiety and depression stemming from my addiction that I was not ready to accept. Fast forward, back to 2017, and by this time I had a few different influences that had made me see things a lot more clearly. These experiences and events are what led me to wanting and understanding that I needed change. I needed to try and regain some sort of control. However, how that change and control was going to happen was something that took me a few times to figure out. My first attempt at gaining control, I would describe it as an idea of toning it down. Up until this point in my life, I was a heavy binge drinker. I would drink when I could and when I shouldn't. 9 times out of 10, ending in a complete blackout. In recent years, I had also begun using cocaine when I drank. I never had any craving for it while sober, but as soon as I would start to drink, a feeling of need, a feeling of demand would wash over me, to feel the effects of the euphoria it provided, to gain a different sensation from what alcohol did. It allowed me to continue drinking, delaying my body from taking control, shutting down, and passing out. This was one reason, but there was also another. I would hope that the night would never end. I would not have to stop. Why did I not want to stop? Because this was my escape. Escape from emotions that I could not overcome while sober. But at the time, I didn't understand. Escape from severe anxiety and depression that would follow 1, 2, or 3 nights in a row of blacking out. These were my habits and behaviors. This is what I was going to tone down. Over 10 years of abuse, I thought I was going to be able to flip a switch and tell myself, let's just have a few drinks. Let's just not use cocaine. This is how easy I thought it was going to be. So this was my plan. The next time I am with my friends, I'm going to tone it down and only have a few. So I put it to the test. I had my first one, attempted to nurse it. I had my second one with slightly less control. Then came a third and a fourth. By now, that craving to use cocaine would return, and I was right back in my regular scheduled programming. The idea that I would be able to pace myself and be in control was a form of delusion that my addiction proved otherwise. It was a nice try, but this showed it wasn't going to be so simple. It was going to take more. Back to the drawing board I went. I had to devise a different way of overcoming this. My next attempt involved quitting altogether. Maybe not forever, but I was going to give myself a break. I had failed to pace myself, but I thought I was going to be strong enough to just say no. So the next time my friends got together to do what we normally did, pregame before going out to the bar, I showed up with nothing. No 15-pack, no 6-pack. My friends might have been confused, as they should be. Why is the guy who is always leading the charge trying to quit all of a sudden? They probably could have guessed, but I never told any of them what I was going through. I never spoke about the guilt and shame I had over what my life had become, or the effect that I knew my drug use was having on our relationships. I never opened up because that would be showing vulnerability. We were in our late 20s, as kids taught never to show emotion, or even what the word vulnerability meant. So here I was in a room full of my closest friends. They were laughing, bullshitting, and enjoying themselves as we normally did. But there was no laughter coming from me. All I could think about was the alcohol that was present. The stress was unbearable. My mind was racing, trying with all my heart not to grab one, to stick to my plan of quitting, saying no, and holding myself accountable. I don't think I lasted an hour. It was all too much. I did not have the proper tools in order to be successful, so I stayed, and I drank. Up until this point, I was 0 for 2 on attempts. So far, I couldn't tone it down, and I couldn't just say no. So my third plan was to not go anywhere or do anything. This is what I did the following weekend. I can't recall what I got up to on the Friday night, but Saturday consisted of me sitting in my condo in complete darkness alone. My only company was a pizza and hockey night in Canada. For someone who was already lonely, this did not help. I was lonely in many ways. My core group of friends did not want much to do with me, and I don't blame them. My actions had put strains on our relationships. I could see them starting to distance themselves, beginning to lose or already having lost respect for me. I had also given up on trying to find a romantic relationship. I hated myself. I was miserable. If the only thing I could do was sit in my misery with a personal opinion of hate, then who would want anything to do with me? This is one of many thoughts that ran through my mind as I sat there alone. But I did it. I made it through a weekend sober, probably the first in God knows how long. Years that I did not have at least one night of heavy drinking. From this, I thought to myself, problem solved. I have overcome my substance abuse, and that is how I looked at it up until this point. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was a binge drinker. I didn't drink every day. I would go on benders, but when they reluctantly needed to end, I didn't wake up and grab another one. Even though I wanted to, I thought that action itself is what would make me an alcoholic. Through this, I may have thought I solved one problem, but it did nothing to help my depressive state. I came out of this experience with what I thought was a new perspective. I spent a weekend sober. I was a changed man. I thought to myself, next weekend is the Stapleton concert. I can go and be in control. I'll be in the driver's seat. I now have experience with sobriety, forgetting that I had already tried this idea without success. Only being able to stay sober by removing myself from the outside world. Experience alone in my condo, not in public, where alcohol is readily available, are two vastly different things. Now back to the story. Friday rolls around, and I head to my friend's house to hang out before the show. I grabbed a six-pack on the way over with the goal of only having a few. My previous weekend sobriety had me believe that I could go back to my plan of taking it easy. I could have a couple beers before, a few at the show, no more drug use, and come straight home after, as there was something else at stake. The next morning, we had a men's league playoff game. Yes, a beer league hockey game, scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Saturday. Why it was scheduled on a Saturday morning was beyond me, but that's not the point. The point was that this is a test. Can I keep myself under control, be present, and then functional for that game the next morning? Why do I care so much about a beer league hockey game, you might ask? Because after all the hockey I played, through the ups and downs of playing at a high level, to how my career ended, the guys on this team are my core group of friends. They are my brothers. I did not want to let them down. Also, I knew that I had already strained a few of these relationships, meaning if I didn't show up, it would only make things worse. These were the guys I had known since childhood. We met over the years playing hockey or through school. We were all different skill levels. Some played out their community days. Some went on to play higher levels. But in the end, we all made it back to play on that same team, and it let me enjoy the game of hockey again. So after a few beers at my friend's place, who was also on the team, and agreed we should take it easy, we headed down to Dutton's Bar in the basement of the Saddle Dome. So far, so good. I have a couple pints of Alexander Keys, which was my go-to. We were having a few laughs. I'm trying to stay present in the moment, trying not to let my addictive reasoning take over, creating thoughts of worry about making sure that I have a full pint on the way for when I take the last sip of this one. Then it's time for the show to start. My friend and I separate from the group and make our way to our seats, picking up a couple more beers as we do. Remember that I said I was going to keep it low-key. This was still low-key. If this was a regular night, I would have been loading up on beers and putting them under my seat to make sure I was able to stay lubricated throughout the show. That would consist of me grabbing 2 at a time, which was the limit per person, returning to stockpile them under my seat, and then immediately going back for more. I would usually stock up at least 5 or 6 dome foams, or heroin beers as they were referred to. They packed a serious punch. They were unlike regular pints. At concerts, you never knew when they were going to shut off the taps. Some were as soon as the main act went on. Some stayed open a little later. Of course, I knew this, and I could never run the risk of running out. I would always be sure to have sufficient inventory stocked, so I would never be caught empty-handed. Alcoholics 101. Be resourceful and have a plan. The show starts, and our seats are quite high on the second deck. This was 2 years after his Travelers album came out, and he was still gaining popularity. Lucky for us, there were empty seats scattered about the lower bowl. We decided to make the move to an empty group we could see across from us. If this was a regular night, I could have never done this. I would have been too stocked with inventory to make it possible, and those beers would have been more important to me than having a better vantage point. On the way to our new seats, I do remember grabbing one or two and my friend saying something along the lines of, "Remember, Mike, we're taking it easy tonight." I would have reassured him, "Oh yeah, I know, don't worry about me." All in all, I probably drank about 10 beers by this point. Yes, still casual, but as you can see, I had lost control when I kept going back for more. And the thought of mixing in a water or something non-alcoholic never once crossed my mind. From what I vividly remember, the show was incredible. His voice and guitar playing was captivating. The way he and his wife sang together brought another level of depth to each of their songs. You could tell that they were connected, mind, body, and soul, reminding me how badly I wanted that with someone, and how the only connection I currently had in my life was with alcohol, and how desperately lonely I was. I remember that vividly, but I have no recollection of what happened immediately after the show. The 10 plus beers had caught up with me, and my addiction had taken over yet again. It led me somewhere, I don't know where, but it was away from the goal that I was hoping to achieve that night. A faint recollection returns, and I can't say for certain, but what I do have is some memory of me sitting alone in my condo living room. The condo that I shared with one of my best and lifelong friends, where every night to this point ended up, still drinking, unable to stop, most likely thinking that in a few hours I was supposed to play a hockey game, knowing that I was not going to make it, and I had already let those friends down. Usually I would be using cocaine to help numb the pain, but this night I wasn't. Instead, I would have been wrestling with my mind, that voice inside my head, trying not to make that call to get some. When I finally knew I wouldn't be strong enough to not make that call, I made a different call. This call was made to my mother, who was always there for me when I needed it. This night was no different. I called, she answered. The last thing I remember is me stumbling out of my condo building, down the stairs to the parking lot, kokanee beer bottle in hand, and climbing into her truck. I had failed. Again. My inability to control myself returned, self-sabotaging any chance of me reaching the outcome I so desperately wanted. This is who I had become, an alcoholic and an addict, with an addiction that had gained full and utter control over all aspects of my life, both mentally and physically. I stood no chance against it in my former state of mind. I woke up at home in my parents' basement, in the room that cycled through my siblings. First it was my brothers, then sisters, then mine. As one moved out, the next would move down. This is a house that we grew up in, and my parents still live to this day. I had woken up late. I had missed the game. I could not look at my phone. It was dead, and I couldn't bring myself to charge it. I knew it would be there when I did. There would be texts asking me where I was. My friends would be pissed. I fucked up again. Then they would turn to concern because they had not heard from me. Those two friends who I've introduced so far had to reach out to my brother because they were worried and I hadn't answered. I wasn't able to bring myself to charge my phone that day. It may have even taken two. I hid cowardly away from a world that I could no longer function in. The shame of where I had ended up was too much for me to handle. When I finally went upstairs, my mother was waiting for me. We sat in silence. She could feel my pain. I was teary-eyed and lost. When I was finally able to say something, I told her that it was time. I had finally come to the realization that I was powerless to alcohol. It consumed every part of my being. It was in control, and it was time for me to take it seriously. It was time for me to ask for help. My mother knew exactly what we needed to do. She had been waiting for this. She got to work, setting up arrangements for me to make an intake call with the treatment center. That treatment center being Top of the World Ranch. The next day, they got in touch with me and let me know that there was a spot available to check in on that coming Wednesday. That was it. I had committed. A word that scared me so much. To put in the effort to give myself the resources in order to overcome my addiction. Was I scared? I was terrified. March 25th, 2017 is my date of sobriety, or my birthday as it is referred to in the recovery community. The day I closed an overdue chapter in my life and turned the page to start anew. I was 26 years old. That day, after my failed attempt to control my alcohol consumption and deciding to seek help with treatment, I had the most honest conversation I'd ever had up until this point in my life, with myself and my mother. I spoke truthfully about how bad my mental state had become, how deeply depressed I was, how ashamed and guilty I felt about where my actions had taken me in life. I opened up about everything I was doing, how I was not just drinking, but also using drugs. Telling my mother that I had been regularly using cocaine when I drank was one of the most freeing experiences I had ever had. I could feel the weight of that secret being lifted off my chest. The weight of carrying around something like that. The shame and thought of knowing the disappointment I am bringing to the people that I care so much about. When relieved, no matter how they respond, is a feeling like no other. We then told my father, who had also been waiting for this. We told him what the situation was and what happened. He showed nothing but support and was thankful that I was going to seek treatment. In the next few days, leading to me entering the ranch, I got myself organized. I withdrew from my classes at Mount Royal University, being honest and stating what the true reason was. I emailed one of my professors, who was teaching a class that I was enrolled in. This class had brought to light many of the problems I was facing. In short, it outlined the negative effects my lifestyle was having in the present, but also what the outcomes could be in the future. I told a few of my closest friends in person. They weren't long conversations. They understood. They knew this is what I needed, and they expressed their full support. After getting organized, my mother and I drove to Windermere Lake, BC, where we have a family cabin, to spend the night before continuing on to just outside Cranbrook, where the Top of the World Ranch Treatment Center was located. We didn't talk much on this trip. We enjoyed each other's company, not knowing where this would lead me. I was scared and uncertain of what I was in for, but was hoping to find some order in the chaos of what my life had become.